I've spent over $1,000 on a game you've probably never heard of. It's because no one plays it. It's called Game of Thrones, the board game. And no, I didn't spend over $1,000 on microtransactions or virtual hookers. No, of course not. No, I spent it on online tournaments. I've organized several tournaments for this game that no one plays. I'm not even kidding you. The only way you play a game with other people is joining a Discord and then scheduling a time with people from around the world. That's it. That is literally the only way. And this past year, I gathered 24 players from around the world to participate in my yearly tournament called Frame of Thrones for $500. Get it? Frame of Thrones, Game of Thrones. Name's FormFrame. You get it. Subscribe! And this year it was Frame of Thrones 3, with a more loaded lineup than ever, with returning champions, up and coming newcomers. This year's Frame of Thrones 3 would be the most insane one yet. Before we go any farther, I should explain the format of this tournament. It's a best of one, top 3 players advance per match. There's 6 players per match, so basically the top half move on, and with 24 players, 24 in the first round, 12 in the second, and then 6 players for the final. Okay, so I realize that if you've made it this far in the video, you probably know how to play the game, or you are so intrigued by how I waste my money that you want more, but you probably don't know how to play the game. I will link an in-depth tutorial if you are actually curious on how to play the game in the description below, but if you don't have that kind of time, let me teach you how to play Game of Thrones the board game in 60 seconds. In Game of Thrones the board game, you are one of the 6 great houses of Westeros, and your objective is to capture and hold 7 castles. The first player to do so wins the game. You have 10 rounds to do it, and if no one has 7 castles at the end of the game, then whoever has the most castles wins. There's tiebreakers and shit, but we don't care about that right now. Now, in order to capture castles, you'll need troops to move around the board, and you get troops when a mustering card is pulled during the Westeros phase. This is probably a good time to mention that the game is broken up into 3 phases: the Westeros phase, the planning phase, and the action phase. At the beginning of each turn, 3 cards are pulled. This is the Westeros phase. It adds variance to the game. Don't worry too much about this. The only important cards are mustering cards, which allow you to recruit troops into your army, supply cards, which determines the size of the armies you can carry, and a Clash of Kings card, which causes a bidding. Now, what is a bidding? A bidding is where all players bid on the 3 influence tracks. These tracks all determine a section of the game and grant advantages to the top bidders. The Iron Throne track is turn order, the Fiefdoms track is combat tiebreakers, and if you're the top bidder, you get a special sword that grants you +1 combat strength. The King's Court track grants you the use of star tokens. Star tokens give you special modifiers like +2 defense tokens that you wouldn't be able to use if you didn't bid enough. On to the planning phase. This is where you plan and place tokens down. You have 5 unique tokens to place on your troops, and you get 3 of each of these tokens. The tokens are march orders. This allows your troops to march. Support orders. This grants your troops to support adjacent areas. Defense orders. This grants combat strength for defending areas. Consolidate power orders. This grants you power tokens, which are used for bidding. Basically, this token gives you money. And raid orders. Don't worry about raid orders. Nobody cares about them. Once you've placed your orders, the action phase begins. We're based off the Iron Throne track that determines throne order. As mentioned earlier, players go in order, marching troops around. The last thing to talk about is combat. When another player attacks another player, you add up the combat strength of both armies, including supports. Then both players place down a card from their hand. These cards have a combat strength number on them ranging from 0 to 4, and usually have some sort of text ability associated with them. The winner is decided and then moves on to the next player. Pretty simple, right? And so the match begins. With Staryarn sitting up top in the north, Hodor as the Baratheons, Darklight as the Greyjoys, Halibard as the Lannisters, and Lord Max Brody and Chogo as the southern houses of Tyrell and Martell respectively. At the beginning of every Game of Thrones match, alliances are made. Without a doubt, making alliances are one of the most crucial things you must do as a Lord of Westeros. Without alliances, you are left usually with no hope and a lot of enemies. And one of the most common alliances in all of Game of Thrones is the Lannister-Greyjoy alliance. But with the Lannisters and Greyjoys teaming up, it allows the Greyjoys to focus on traveling up north to deal with the Starks. After the first turn, about half of the players elected a spread out strategy, hoping for a mustering card which allows players to draft more troops into their army. The Baratheons took control of 2 extra castles in turn 1, which is an aggressive strategy and very dependent on the Westeros cards. Placing troops in Storm's End can easily anger the Martells, causing early conflict. While over to the southeast, Lord Max Brody controlling the Tyrells also spread out, claiming the Reach and Old Town. This is a normal Tyrell opening, as he isn't at much risk with other houses, but controls more castles. Greyjoys also elected this similar opening as they moved their troops to Seaguard and Flint's Finger, very much hoping for a mustering card so he can place a boat in the Sunset Sea, giving him an angle on the Bay of Ice up north. The other houses, Stark, Lannister, and Martells, all elected a different strategy, as they proceeded to bulk up their armies and hope to take advantage next turn. This is especially crucial for the Starks as they needed to place a boat in the Bay of Ice to prevent the Greyjoys from roaming free into their territory. However, when the Westeros cards turned over, there was no mustering, only a supply which helped only the 3 northern houses slightly. No blood was shed in round 2, but the players were moving into position to strike. The Greyjoys moved out into the Sunset Sea, the Baratheons left their ancestral seat of Storm's End because he saw the Martells headed his way, and other houses moved to consolidate more power and land. The Starks made a daring move into Moat Cailin, making them an even more prime target for the Greyjoys. The Baratheons conquered King's Landing and the Tyrells just sat and made some money. But turn 3 would pour some blood in the water for some houses, as during the Westeros phase, a Clash of Kings card was pulled. This card forces all players to bid upon the 3 influence tracks, which all determine aspects of the game. The throne is turn order, the fiefdoms track decides combat tiebreaks, and if you are first, you gain the Valyrian Steel Blade, as mentioned earlier, which grants you a +1 combat strength in battles, and the King's Court track, which grants you access to using special star tokens that have modifiers that help you in and out of combat. This early bidding would spell disaster for one house in particular, the Starks of Winterfell. The player Stargaren made daring and aggressive moves in the first 2 rounds, but it would be his undoing. Because he expanded so far so early, he had to place his power tokens down in the territories to claim them, which is what players used to bid with. Him having no tokens robbed him of his chance of having star tokens to help beat back the impeding Greyjoy invasion. After the bidding, it would seem wise to put all your money on the Greyjoys. They have the best cards, the fiefdoms track, and now access to 2 star tokens, an almost unbeatable combination. At the beginning of turn 3, Greyjoys immediately strikes and claims the Bay of Ice in the first fight of the game. The Greyjoys now have full access to the north and the capital of Winterfell. Darklight has every advantage and has a chance to put the Starks on life support in its only turn 3. Down in the south, it's all about expansion. The Lannisters sit on 3 castles and 6 potential supply, along with a support hub in the Stony Sept to protect all of Halibard's territories. The Martells also expanded and filled in their respective homelands, while the Tyrells and Baratheons added more troops to their armies. Turn 4 rolls around and a mustering card is revealed, which makes everyone on the board so much more threatening. Now everyone can start a war, except for the poor Starks up north who are just trying to hold on, hoping for a miracle and support from another house. Maybe the Lannisters would use this chance to strike the Greyjoys and claim the Iron Islands for themselves, but sadly, no one answered the call. The Greyjoys sent everything they had up north, and when the dust settled, the Kraken rose over Winterfell and forced the Starks to go into hiding. During this turn, the Baratheons also made a push into Lannister territory by fighting over the cursed castle of Harrenhal, setting the Lannisters back in their plans. But the Deep South didn't react to this. They just continued to sit and churn out money and boost their own economies. Turn 5 would make things a little hairy for the Lannisters. Halibard's forces were extended and it was already fighting on one front, but one card in the Westeros phase would cause a panic for him as Web of Lies was pulled, a card that doesn't allow you to place any support tokens on the board for an entire round. This compiled with the Baratheons' invading force gave the Tyrells a chance to join the fray. The Tyrells swiftly march into the Sea Road marshes, killing the lone footmen holding the territory, and the Greyjoys would claim dominion over Moat Cailin and bringing their total castle count to 6. Darklight has placed himself in a great position to not only qualify to the next round of the tournament, but claim victory in less than an hour. Turn 6 would prove to be somewhat uneventful. The Greyjoys claimed more territory in the north, and their allies, the Lannisters, would continue to struggle against the powerful Lord Max Brody, as he would claim the Blackwater, stealing supply straight from the Lannisters, and the ever-expanding Baratheons as they felt comfortable to move into the Vale. The Lannisters had been knocked down from their seemingly impenetrable nation a couple turns ago to just 3 land territories remaining. If he wanted to qualify to the next round and stay in the tournament, he would have to make crucial and precise moves, and most importantly, he would need a miracle. At the start of round 7, a Clash of Kings was pulled, forcing every house into the second bidding of the match. And maybe without realizing it, this would be the turning point for many houses. The Lannisters were able to sneak out the fiefdoms track and claim the Valyrian Steel Blade that would help him fight off the pesky Tyrells. But the bidding for the King's Court track would drain the bank for a lot of players, including the strong Baratheons, who would end up dumping all their money on it in order to be able to continue to use the 3-star orders the next turn. But the one house that truly got the worst of the bidding was none other than the first place Greyjoys, who had nearly no dollar to their name because while they were expanding so fast, they had run their gold reserves dry. Greyjoy lost their Valyrian Steel Blade and actually fell to the back of the pack on the fiefdoms track, meaning that they would lose every tiebreaker in combat. They also lost all their star orders, making it much harder to maneuver around the board and harder to control his lands and castles. And by the time the action started, Stargaren as the Starks of Winterfell sent his entire army at Moat Cailin to retake the castle, killing the siege engine stationed there. Greyjoy also had no way of retaliating to this and could not retake the castle this round. As for the south, the Baratheons were starting to feel that now is the time to push the limit and fight the Tyrells. This would be his ultimate undoing. As finally the Martells of Dorne show their faces by attacking the Kingswood and beginning a war with the Baratheons. The Lannisters also began to notice the dire circumstances of their situation. If he was to qualify for the next round, he needed castles, and he needed them fast. He may have made an alliance with the Greyjoys at the beginning, but out of desperation, he betrayed his closest ally and took Seaguard for himself. And when turn 8 hit, the Lannisters didn't stop there. It was their time. No more sitting back in the hopes that the Tyrells or Baratheons would somehow slip up. His path to advancing to the next round was right there in front of him the whole time. He was just looking in the wrong direction. The Lannisters, with their opening move of the round, sent ships into Iron Man's Bay surrounding the capital of House Greyjoy. This only meant one thing: all-out war between the former allies. The Greyjoys would answer back by taking the Golden Sound, and then soon after sending a siege down to Riverrun in hopes to put down this uprising of their former teammate. But when attacking, an unlikely move appeared from a former enemy. The Baratheons supported the Lannisters at Riverrun, giving the edge to the Lannisters and destroying the Greyjoy siege engine. The frustration was boiling over as the Greyjoys began to say his feelings about traitors out loud. His displeasure was no secret, but the Lannisters refused to be slandered. What's this Lannister say? What does Lannister say here? I always stood by you, Greyjoy. I supported you in bidding. I gave you the sea at my doorsteps and always looked after you. But you always took. You never helped me against the invasion at my doorstep. Oh my god. You see, when you play this game, you may think it's about outsmarting your enemies and putting yourself in advantageous spots with your army to win battles. But that's a misconception. Game of Thrones, the board game, is about politics. I've played games with other players that would rather see their castles burn to the ground than betray an ally and dishonor themselves and break oaths. But the Lannisters felt forgotten. They were left to deal with the Baratheons and Tyrells alone. The Lannisters needed help, but their friend, the Greyjoys, were nowhere to be found. This is the single reason the Lannisters did this. If the Greyjoys would have helped just in a battle or two, maybe his empire wouldn't be on fire, and maybe he would have sat the Iron Throne. But the time for apologies is now far too late. He was now lost in the north with no friends and surrounded by enemies on all fronts. And in the south, a similar situation was transpiring. The once powerful Baratheons now found themselves cornered by the powerhouse of the two southern lords. They overwhelmed him with the Tyrells attacking by land and claiming King's Landing, while the Martells striked swiftly in the sea, crippling the Baratheons. As we enter round 9, players only have one thing on their mind: qualify. Qualify to fight another day. Winning was not the priority. Making it to top 3 was. The Lannisters took back the Golden Sound, removing any possibility of the Greyjoys touching Riverrun or Lannisport. And then they put the final nail in the coffin to the once proud Greyjoys and stormed the island of Pike to claim it for themselves. The Greyjoys were defeated, and in the end they only had one castle. From a great empire on the verge of victory to total collapse simply because their ally felt slighted by them. The dynamic duo of Lord Max Brody and Chogo proved to be too strong for the Baratheons to do anything as well. The Martells would claim their capital of Dragonstone, and in the final moves of the game, the Tyrells would take both Harrenhal and Crocklaw Point to reach 7 castles in 9 rounds to win the match. At the end of the first match of the tournament, Lord Max Brody, Chogo, and the questionable honor of Halibard would advance to the semifinals. The second match of the Frame of Thrones tournament begins with a new set of players from around the world. Pao Chow F as the Greyjoys, Kikva as the Lannisters, Gemmo as the Starks, Sir Poops as the Baratheons, Stardust as the Martells, and You Got Franked as the Tyrells. The first round went quick and started with more bloodshed than the first match of the tournament, as this time there was no Lannister-Greyjoy alliance. The Greyjoys striked first by taking Riverrun immediately and ended up losing his 4 card, but the Lannisters misplayed and also played their 4 in a losing battle. But at the start of round 2, the players would be hit with an early Clash of Kings, forcing them into a bid. The throne would go to the Greyjoys, the fiefdoms to the Tyrells, and the King's Court to the Greyjoys. Just by looking at the board, it looks like an unfortunate beginning for the Lannisters, but without the Valyrian Steel Blade to help win early battles, the Lannisters were able to take advantage and claimed Iron Man's Bay and outplayed the Greyjoys by using their Tyrion card and not allowing the Greyjoys to play the best card in the game, Balon, which repealed an attack on Lannisport, leaving his troops routed and at 0 strength. The Lannisters wasted no time and murdered them all. The Starks decided to take advantage of this aggression and killed the troops holding up in Greywater Watch. And by round 2, an aggressive strategy by the Greyjoys has left them with no ground troops, only boats. Turn 3 was rather tame in terms of combat, as the Greyjoys prioritized reclaiming their sea from the Lannisters, but still didn't hold any land territory. However, the rest of the board has taken note of this war waging in the west. The Baratheons advance to Harrenhal in the Blackwater, the Starks swing their knight down to Flint's Finger, and the Tyrells place a knight in the Sea Road Marshes and a boat in the Sunset Sea, putting them in harm's way in the war between the Lannisters and the Greyjoys. In turn 4, a mustering card was drawn, allowing players to beef up their armies, making everyone look intimidating. All except the sad Greyjoys. The players could have chilled around for another round or two before making a move against another player, but now since everyone had armies, it was time to change the game. The Tyrells began attacking several times, but failing to claim victory against the Baratheons and the Lannisters. The Baratheons noticed the Starks were uncontested, and if left unchecked for any longer, would be in a position that would threaten him. And so Sir Poop sent his navy up north and claimed control of the Narrow Sea. The Lannisters moved farther east into the Twins, and the Martells did Martell things and sat on their army in Dorne. Turn 5 would become a turning point in the game for many houses. A mustering pulled for the second consecutive time put even more troops on the board, in addition to a bidding which placed the Baratheons in a great spot with the Iron Throne and King's Court in hand, and second on the fiefdoms behind the Starks. But something would change this turn. The Baratheons currently seemed unstoppable. A large army, an imposing navy, expanding to the north and west with unrateable supports to his territories and controlled 4 castles. A few more good plays and the game would be his. But in the Game of Thrones, the board game, battles are won and lost over a single troop. A support from an enemy could swing the tides in your favor. Or maybe just a simple miscalculation could spill the end for a great empire. Sir Poops opened the round by moving his large army to Dragonstone, and sending a footman to Moat Cailin in order to use his Patchface card to get rid of the Stark's 4 card, Eddard Stark. The Baratheons were planning something big, and it was clear. North was where his eyes were set on. But the enemy was not in front of him. It was to the south. The Martells of Dorne strike with the might of their entire navy, and by a single combat point, the Martells gained control of Shipbreaker Bay, leaving the Baratheons' host stranded and vulnerable. The Starks would also strike back and reclaim the Narrow Sea with an attack of their own. And in a single turn, the first place Baratheons, who could see the path to victory, all of a sudden were cut off from the sea and left out to dry. The Tyrells took advantage of this as well, and took King's Landing and Blackwater from the Baratheons. But perhaps not all hope was lost. Another house that seemed lost in the first few turns has now reclaimed Riverrun and the name of House Greyjoy from the Lannisters. Turn 6 doesn't have any help for the houses struggling. The Lannisters' ability to put away the Greyjoys early has bit them in the back. As they get pushed around and out of Seaguard, the Baratheons lose another castle as the Martells have access to all their land via the sea as Crackclaw Point falls out of Sir Poops' hands. But not all is lost, as they are able to push the Martells out of their sea, keeping Dragonstone and his army alive for now. The Lannisters did try and make some moves as they reclaimed the Sunset Sea from the invading Tyrells. The quiet and creeping Starks now use this time to take the Eyrie and the Mountains of the Moon for an additional castle. As turn 7 comes around, just one look at the board and you can see that the southern alliance between the Tyrells and Martells has once again in this tournament been extremely advantageous and worked out for both parties. Together, they nearly control over half the map. The Baratheons stole back their ancestral home of Storm's End from the Martells with their army from Dragonstone. The Lannisters took their army from the Twins and stole back Seaguard from the Greyjoys that sent their routed troops to Riverrun, where a Tyrell knight was waiting to strike. This forced the Greyjoys' hand by making them play their best card, Balon, leaving them much weaker. When turn 8 arrived, there was only really 3 contenders able to win.
the two southern houses of Martell and Tyrell, and a quiet and greedy Northman who was sitting at 5 castles but almost seemed impossible to reach 6 or 7 to claim victory. As for Martell and Tyrell, only a few turns remained and both houses were running out of castles to conquer. They would soon have to turn towards each other. It was clear on both sides that war was coming. It first started with raids. The Martells could sense an attack, so they raided the Tyrell's support. It was the Tyrells who drew first blood, though, by attacking the southernmost castle, Starfall. But the Martells would use their card Ariane to stop the Tyrells from claiming the castle, and not too long after, the Tyrells would go on the offensive and storm the Sea Road marshes and killing the Tyrell siege engine. The Baratheons would also lose control over Storm's End this turn, turning the top 3 houses in a race to 7, with all of them sitting at 5 castles. But turn 9 would turn this into a 2-player game. Immediately out of the gates, Baratheons retake Crackclaw Point. The Tyrells even supported them in this battle to help free up the castles for them later on. The Greyjoys would make a move on the Golden Sound and control the Lannister Sea. Even though the Greyjoys were sitting at 2 castles, there are many castles in their region that with the right moves could catapult them into top 3 and advance to the next round. The Martells, realizing how dangerous Tyrell is, moves into the West Summer Sea, stifling any chance the Tyrells have of taking their castles in the south. But the Tyrells had already planned for this, and in the end, it didn't matter. The true goal was north, not south. The Tyrells claimed Crackclaw Point from the Baratheons, though it would soon be taken back, not by the Baratheons or Martells, but by the Starks of Winterfell. Gemmo had waited for his moment to strike, and he took it. He would now sit at 6 castles, 1 away from victory. The Tyrells had other plans though, as a freshly defeated Lannister army sat at the capital Lannisport. The Tyrell host marched into the Lannister territory and claimed it for themselves as their 6th castle. The players don't know what it was that day, but the gods of the 7 kingdoms were smiling down on the Tyrells. As during the Westeros phase, the cards Dark Wings, Dark Words appeared, which left the option to the player in control of the King's Court to decide if they should collect power tokens, do nothing, or bid. And the most important thing, this late in the game, isn't alliances, it isn't the size of your army, it's turn order. And with both Tyrell and Stark at 6 castles, the player to go first would be able to put this game away for good and claim victory. And so the Tyrells chose to bid. But one look at everyone's economy and you would see that most houses are poor, except for 2. The Starks and the Tyrells, who both sat at a max of 17 power tokens. And when the bidding occurred, both houses bid every power token they had for the throne, 17 to 17. And in situations like this, there is only one player who decides tiebreakers, the holder of the Iron Throne. The beat down Baratheons, who once looked over with such awe, were now reduced to 3 territories left and 1 castle. But by the grace of the gods, it was up to him to decide the winner. Whoever he picked would be able to march first and take their 7th castle. The Baratheons had no love for either player as he fought both, but in the end he chose the Tyrells of Highgarden. And on the 10th and final turn, an army of 2 knights and a siege engine rode east and captured the castle of Crackclaw Point and won the game. The third match of the Frame of Thrones tournament was one that people had marked their calendars for. It consisted of some of the strongest and biggest names in Game of Thrones, the board game history, full of players that have participated in Frame of Thrones from years past, including the 2 champions of Frame of Thrones. The Year 1 inaugural winner Naman OJ, who looks to sit upon the Iron Throne once again, and the Year 2 defending world champion Sir Groundhog, who wants to solidify his position as the GOAT of Game of Thrones, the board game. The players called this the Death Group, as there was so much talent in this group, and it was going to take everything these players had in order to advance to the next round. And I lost the VOD. I know, I'm sorry, I lost it, okay? I don't know how I forgot to download it. It's gone. The VOD is gone. I'm sorry. It was a great match. It was. I promise. I mean, it happened months ago, but it was a great match. I'm sure it was. But I'm so sorry. I forgot it. But I can tell you who advanced, though. Turns out the Death Group couldn't stop the previous champions, as Naman OJ and Sir Groundhog both advanced to the next round, along with a familiar face in TFK Guysguard. The semifinals were almost set. Just 1 match remained before locking in the final 12 players. And it wouldn't be a FormFrame esports tournament without some drama or something going wrong. And this tournament was no exception. You see, Game of Thrones the board game can take some time, like 3 to 4 hours kind of time. So it's a big commitment. and getting players to come across time zones and show up on time and making sure they can stay for the whole duration can kind of be a hassle, because you know, these people have like these lives to get back to or something. So on the morn of the final first round match, we were missing one player. We needed one, just one singular player to fill a spot. But as time went by, no hero came to our aid. So we had to improvise and make the only decision we had left. I would step up to the challenge and put myself in my own tournament, the nuclear option, but it was the only option we had. And so we had found our sixth player. But there was something else. Drama. Sweet, tasty, juicy, mouth-watering drama. While waiting for a hero to fill our final spot in the match, some of the players began to become restless. And one of those players simply asked a question about another player. A your mom joke from one of the players, Tyrone. This sent ripples through the Frame of Thrones tournament and FormFrame esports history, as it spiraled out of control as the other player on the receiving end of the joke, Sezu, was not having it. This continued and it eventually spilled into the match. The match began, and as fate would have it, Tyrone would be given the House of Lannister and Sezu the House of Tyrell. Two rivals that are already at each other's throats, only one space away. And Tyrone did not hold back. Immediately on turn 1, the Lannisters put a knight in the Sea Road Marshes. A hyper-aggressive move that is usually never played as an opening against the Tyrells because it can expose the Lannisters. But the Lannisters wanted the Tyrells to know that they were coming. The Baratheons, led by the player Littlefinger, moved boats to Blackwater Bay and Star Consolidated, which granted him the ability to muster in Dragonstone. Marcus Aurelius, the head of House Martell, made similar moves by taking Starfall and also consolidating in Sunspear. Sezo, leading the Tyrells, paid no mind to the Lannisters and headed south. Jax Mohanson, the Lord of Winterfell and leader of the Starks, made expected openings with the Starks. And finally me, placed in position of one of the most powerful houses, the Greyjoys, and I immediately expanded and took control of all the castles around my shores. Turn 2 came around and Westeros was hit with an early Wildlings attack, where not a single house tried to defend the realm, and turned out to be one of the worst decisions for all the houses. The Wildlings won and made every house lose 2 troops around the board, leaving the realm sparse of soldiers. This didn't slow down the Lannisters though, as they immediately striked at the capital of the Tyrells in a losing effort, but was able to take away the Tyrell 3 card. I decided to take advantage of these moves and begun my own campaign on the Lannisters by killing his ship in the Sunset Sea and taking Riverrun. The rest of the board stayed neutral and expanded. Turn 3 was no help in terms of combat strength, as no mustering card was pulled, so many people were still left with their starting armies. And while I was low on troops, the Starks came down all the way to Seaguard to take my castle. I wouldn't simply allow such treachery, so I sent my troops back north to retake the castle, and while that was the only action for turn 3, something worse would happen. Drama. More drama. The Tyrells were fed up with the Lannister games and pre-game comments, and they threatened to leave the game, sending an ultimatum that either Tyrone leaves the game or he would. But I wouldn't have it. As a tournament organizer, you must be unmoving and solid in your decisions. And so I made the one choice I only had. We don't negotiate with terrorists. We don't negotiate with terrorists here. He ended up leaving the game. This forces the Tyrells to become vassals, basically a house controlled by another house, but with limited moves and cards. It was frustrating, but the noble houses of Westeros carried on. Turn 4 would arrive, and I would realize that while I was focused on the opportunities to the south, the Starks had the same idea as me. The Starks had crept on my land by taking Flint's Finger and Greywater Watch. I couldn't let that slide, so I fought back with my powerful cards and took back my land. The rest of the realm would see it was prime picking to take from the Tyrells. The Lannisters tried their hand at taking Highgarden again, but failed, and the Martells would use their navy to control the West Summer Sea. In turn 5, the Baratheons would finally make their first military move and crush the Lannister army sitting in the Reach and serving them fresh on a platter to the Martells to finish them off. Seeing the Lannisters at an all-time low, I decided to take advantage of this and take their sea. And the Tyrells, who was a vassal controlled by the Baratheons, used their naval power to kick the Martells out of the West Summer Sea. Just looking at the board in round 6, you could tell this was no normal game. 2 great houses almost essentially extinct. It was a mad dash for the other houses to grab castles and possibly steal this game away. The Baratheons, realizing how close this game could be to ending, stormed the walls of Harrenhal and put themselves in first place. But the Baratheons hadn't lost a battle yet this game, undefeated in the field until the Dornish army came from the Boneway and crushed the Baratheon host sitting on the Reach, killing one of his knights. The Lannisters would try and fight back against me, sensing their demise. They fought back and took back their sea, but I had anticipated this and retook the sea and then finished him off by sending an army of my knights to take Lannisport. As the board reached turn 7, there was only 4 houses really in contention of winning, but it was so close between all of them it could be anyone's game. And turn 7 would be the final moves for all houses remaining, and it's all because I'm an idiot. The Martells would open up by taking control of Highgarden, a feat the Lannisters failed to achieve 2 times. The Martells seemed to have the game in hand, sitting at 6 castles, but it was my passiveness this round that led to the end for everyone. The Starks first traveled from White Harbor to an open Crackclaw Point, bringing them to 5 castles. They then went from Winterfell to Flint's Finger and crushed my siege engine, putting them at 6 castles, and without realizing it, I had made a huge blunder by leaving Seaguard wide open. Not even a troop. I left it defenseless, and all the Starks had to do was march right in and claim their 7th castle and win the Iron Throne. One misstep had cost me everything, and even though I had placed 3rd and qualified for the next round, I was too ashamed and recused myself and allowed the Baratheons to advance to the semifinals.
Now the semifinals were set, and only 12 players remained. It had concentrated the top talent of the game, and was now forcing all players to play their very best. No mistakes could be made, or it could cost them everything. The first semifinal match was a grueling 10-round affair, with some of the best players in the world. You Got Franked commanded the Martells, TFK Geisgard had control of the Tyrells, Marcus Aurelius the Baratheons, Nam and OJ the Lannisters, Littlefinger the Greyjoys, and the Starks belonged to Lord Max Brody. Some games of the Game of Thrones board game can be hectic and absurd, like the final match in the first round, but sometimes the games can be slow and methodical, every player making numerous calculations all at once. And for the first 4 rounds, not much happened. A few sea battles here and there, but nothing major. Not until round 4 did it seem like players were beginning to take risks. The Lannisters did a little manifest destiny with their empire by going from west to east by taking Crackclaw Point away from the Baratheons, and even taking away supply from them with another victory at the Blackwater. Things were about to heat up. Turn 5 would hit and the Baratheons would retake Crackclaw from the Lannisters, re-establishing their foothold on the continent, and the Greyjoys would push north and claim the Bay of Ice, threatening Winterfell. The southern houses stayed somewhat stationary and neutral throughout the 5 turns, but turn 6 would begin to turn the board upside down as a Web of Lies card was pulled, meaning that no one could play any support tokens. Support tokens can be a crutch for some houses, specifically the Baratheons, who rely on naval support to maintain their land troops. The Lannisters would act fast on this and claim Crackclaw and King's Landing, putting them in sole control of the center of the board. The Tyrells would soon make their first move as well by sending troops to claim the Sea Road Marshes from the Lannisters. Seeing the Lannisters are so far east made the opportunity an easy one for the Tyrells. The Greyjoys didn't march on Winterfell, but instead opted to apply pressure to the Starks by placing a siege engine on the Stony Shore. The Greyjoys were mounting an assault and the Starks had to do something and do it quick. The Lannisters started turn 7 by going on the offensive. They saw an impeding tact on their capital from the Tyrells and sent their army to deal with them. The Tyrells had anticipated this though, and they responded with an attack of their own, retaking the Sea Road Marshes, and since they won the battle with their Sir Loras card, they were able to keep their march order, threatening Lannisport. The Starks would attack the Stony Shore and destroy the Greyjoy siege, and the Martells of Dorne would betray and claim the West Summer Sea from the preoccupied Tyrells, catching them off guard. The Greyjoys would make some interesting moves here by retaking the Stony Shore from the Starks and also removing the Martells from the West Summer Sea. But the Martells used their Arianne card to keep the Greyjoys from taking control of the sea, leaving it vacant. The Starks would make a daring move down south by taking control of Crackclaw Point with the help of the Baratheons. But the Starks would only be happy for a short time because next the Greyjoys decided to go for the heart of the north. With only a night, the Greyjoys traveled north and claimed Winterfell. Surprisingly, without Winterfell, the Starks maintained a grip on the northeastern side of the board and sat with 4 castles and in first place. With only 3 rounds to go, players were beginning to feel the pressure rising. In turn 8, a Clash of Kings card is drawn, and a bidding would take place. The powerful Lannisters who maintained control of all tracks would lose all 3, but still stay close to the top. The Greyjoys would make a play for the throne as they took control of the Iron Throne track in order to go first. The wealthy Tyrells would pay a pretty penny for the King's Court track, and the last place Baratheons bet it all on the Fiefdoms track to help them in the battlefield. Turn 8 was more of a positioning round as there was no battles except for one by the Martells. They attacked the Reach from the Kingswood in order to basically screw over the Tyrells by using Doran Martell's card, which is basically poison, because it allows the Martells to send the other player's position of any tracks to the very bottom. So that's what the Martells did.
They saw the Tyrells waste all their money on the King's Court track, position themselves second, then striked, dropping the Tyrells to the bottom and moving the Martells to the top and in control of the King's Court track. Turn 9 would open with the Baratheons storming King's Landing in a mad dash to claim real estate in order to get the Baratheons into the top 3. The Martells and Tyrells would exchange blows as bad blood between them brewed. In a rare Baratheon Greyjoy battle would go down as the twins would attack the castle of Seaguard in a losing effort. Once again, it seemed that the players were becoming more and more cautious as the rounds dwindled. And as the final round approached, some houses wanted things to stay the same, others needed to make big moves, and others were out for revenge. Sometimes in life, we are left with an impossible choice, where no matter what you do, no good will come from it. But in the end, you must choose. There is no third option, either A or B, the red or blue pill, to seize the Iron Throne or take revenge. Throughout this entire game, the Greyjoys and the Starks have been at war. If the Greyjoys take Northern Land, the Starks have tried to find a way to get it back. But the Greyjoys have been relentless. And at the start of round 10, the Greyjoys maintained of Winterfell, sleeping in their beds, eating their food. But in the final round, Winterfell would become a bloodbath, because in the final round alone, Winterfell would change hands 5 times, and only between Stark and Greyjoy. If the Starks claimed it, the Greyjoys were right back with another army, but Starks are prepared for this and with an even bigger army, and by the end the Greyjoys had settled in Winterfell, but the Starks still have one march left, and they were left with an interesting dilemma. And this dilemma is what makes this game so perfect. With how the rest of the board developed in the final round, the Starks had the final march of the game, and had 2 options. March to Crack Claw where the Lannisters are and take the castle by force and win the game and sit the Iron Throne. Or head back north and reclaim your ancestral castle of Winterfell and finish second. But if you choose this route, not only will you finish second, but you will effectively remove Greyjoys out of the top 3 and eliminate them from the tournament. And so there it is, the impossible choice, the throne or revenge. Lord Max Brody is literally fingertips away from the throne. He has the army. He has the cards. All he has to do is reach out and take it. But it wouldn't be right. It wouldn't be right to sit on the Iron Throne while injustice is still out there. This scourge of Greyjoy must be dealt with. And so the Starks of Winterfell turned down the throne and headed back north, back home, and removed this Greyjoy threat for good. And the direwolf once again flew over the top of Winterfell. The finals were almost set. Only 3 spots remained and one game would decide how the fate of the realm would fare. The battle of the realm would be between Gemmo, Stardust, Chogo, Jax Mohanson, Halibard, and Sir Groundhog. The first round was one of expansion. The Starks moved pieces and placed a ship in the Bay of Ice. The Greyjoys took control of their coast and made an alliance with the nearby Lannisters, who also expanded by taking lands as far as Harrenhal, and also claiming supply to hedge themselves on the Westeros cards. The Baratheons moved their hosts into King's Landing, the Tyrells took the Reach and Old Town, and the Martells moved into Starfall and beefed up their navy. The second round began with a clash of kings, which ended up benefiting the southern houses. The Tyrells claimed the throne, while the Martells enjoyed the fiefdoms. However, the Greyjoys dumped their reserves into the King's Court track after ending up last on the other 2 tracks. And in round 2, we get our first battle. The Baratheons chose not to be passive this game and immediately sent troops into the Blackwater, and a knight into the recently abandoned Reach to claim the castle. The Martells took a page out of the Baratheons' book and attacked the West Summer Sea, applying immense pressure on the Tyrells. The Starks also made moves this round and stormed the castle of the Eyrie with a large army. Round 3 started with a mustering and allowed most of the board to grow stronger. I say most because the Starks start the game with only 1 supply, which makes growing an army very difficult for them. The Greyjoys decided to test their new strength against the north by heading north to the Bay of Ice. You could tell with the Greyjoy's movement and the large host at Seaguard that he was preparing for something big in the coming turns. The battles in the center of the board did not slow down either, as the Lannisters raged back against the Baratheons at the Blackwater, but even with the Lannisters using their 4 card, they lost the battle. It was not looking good for the defending world champion Sir Groundhog. The only good thing out of this was the Baratheons also wasted their 4 here. In turn 4, another clash of kings appeared, tipping the balance towards the Starks and Lannisters, as both houses nearly claimed the top positions in each track. And now the Lannisters had control of the fiefdoms track. The fear of the Baratheon soldiers began to set in. The Lannisters wasted no time and engaged in another battle for the Blackwater. but this time with the support of Harrenhal, which not only netted him a convincing victory, but a bloody one, as the Lannisters played their 3 card here, Sir Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, and killed the Baratheon army of 2 knights in a single blow, in a defeat that would take time for the Baratheons to recover from. But luckily they had a fresh set of knights in Dragonstone, and sent them to claim Crackclaw Point in the name of House Baratheon. But as fate would have it, at the beginning of turn 5, another Clash of Kings was pulled. 3 times in 5 turns is pretty egregious, and wreaks havoc on the house's economies. Very unfortunate for the Starks, but very fortunate for the Tyrells, who despite having decent numbers on the board, needed some sort of help. The Lannisters luckily were able to hang on to the Valyrian Steel Blade again, something that the Baratheons were hoping would be in someone else's hands. The turn would go in the favor of the Tyrells, as they repealed an attack from the Lannisters at Sea Road Marshes and were able to regain control of the West Summer Sea from the Martells with a massive attack from their navy. However, the biggest move happened up north, as the Greyjoys had finally positioned themselves to attack Winterfell, and in one swift motion stormed Winterfell and claimed it for House Greyjoy. Turn 6 would consist of many battles. The Lannisters marched farther south to take the reach from the Baratheons. The Starks would try and fight back against Jax Mohansen and the Greyjoys by taking Moat Cailin, but eventually lose it by the end of the round. And the Martells would win a nice land battle at the Princess Pass, a crucial choke point in any Deep South battle. In turn 7, the Tyrells would strike at the castle Starfall, but would be driven back after a bloody response from the Martells with the help of the Red Viper, killing a Tyrell footman and a knight. The Martells would also make the Tyrells pay by reclaiming the West Summer Sea from them. The Lannisters would attempt to take King's Landing from the Baratheons, but would end up losing control of the Reach after the Baratheons attacked the Lannisters' routed troops. And soon after, the Baratheons would send an army of 3 knights to seize the castle of Harrenhal from the Lannisters, bringing the Lannisters down to 2 castles and putting them in 5th place. The Starks would also finally score a victory at Moat Cailin and hold the castle for the turn. And as we reached turn 8, it was clear that some houses needed to make important moves and decisions if they were going to reach top 3 and secure a spot in the finals. The Tyrells would start the round by clearing the Martells from their sea, then the Starks would reclaim Winterfell from the Greyjoys. The Baratheons would then miscalculate their numbers when attacking the Lannisters in the Blackwater. This ended up leaving Harrenhal open for the taking. At the same time, the Greyjoys launched a counterattack back onto Winterfell and putting them securely atop the standings. The Starks, however, refused to let go of the north and sent a knight to take White Harbor. The Lannisters would move into Harrenhal for free, and the Tyrells would attack the Reach to put them back in contention, and setting the previously tied for first Baratheons into 5th place. All this turn proved was that anyone was still in the game, maybe not to win, but to get top 3. And when turn 9 began, everyone knew it was going to be a big round when the Web of Lies card was pulled. Ensuring no one could rely on support orders, the Baratheons were able to take the Reach easily. The Lannisters were also able to take advantage of this by taking Crackclaw Point from the Starks. The Greyjoys would also poach off the Starks by attacking Moat Cailin. This now set the top 3 as the Greyjoys, Martells, and Lannisters. But nothing felt safe. Any house could come from anywhere with any army and knock you out of the top 3, eliminating you from the tournament. The Starks opened the round looking for castles and set their sight on Crackclaw Point to steal from the Lannisters. The Baratheons took this opening and decided to easily take the open castle of the Eyrie, putting them in the top 3 and knocking the Lannisters out. But the Lannisters had no interest in reclaiming Crackclaw from the Starks, for a bigger prize was on the table: King's Landing. And with an army of 8, the Baratheons, who had hung on to King's Landing the entire game, lost the stronghold. But losing the castle wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the card the Lannisters played. Using the card of Cersei Lannister, the Lannisters are able to remove one of the Baratheons' order tokens off the board. They use this to remove the march order of the siege engine waiting in Dragonstone, ready to retake King's Landing. This big brain play effectively crippled the Baratheons and left them scrambling for anything to help them qualify. They could only take 1 castle now, with 1 march left, and they sent their army to take Crackclaw Point from the Starks. The Starks then took Moat Cailin from the mighty Greyjoys, but the moment wouldn't last, as the Greyjoys used their army in Winterfell to recapture Moat Cailin, putting them back into 1st place. And in the final battle, House Tyrell would try and ruin the game for the Martells, but would lose at Starfall, cementing the Chogo-led Martells a place in the finals, along with the defending world champion Sir Groundhog's Lannisters, and finally Jax Mohansen's Greyjoys finished in 1st place and won the match. And now the time has come. The bells have been rung. The clock has struck 12. The final match has arrived. 24 players entered and only 6 remain. Who will be crowned the Frame of Thrones 3 World Champion? Will it be Chogo, the solid performer who's gotten 2nd in both of his tournament matches? He's been close in every game, but hasn't been able to seal the deal yet. Could it be the Frame of Thrones veteran, You Got Franked, who's a strong player and looking for his first Frame of Thrones title? Is it the newcomer and standout player Lord Max Brody? He's played at an elite level this tournament. Can he finish it with a win? Maybe it will be the defending Frame of Thrones world champion Sir Groundhog. The so-called GOAT of the game looks to bounce back and defend his title after a scary semi-finals game that almost got him eliminated. But someone else has a legacy to upkeep. The inaugural Frame of Thrones world champion Naman OJ won't go down without a fight. Or will it be Jax Mohansen, who has played at peak performance in this tournament, going 2 for 2 in winning the early round matches, and is also the sole NA player remaining. And so the finals begin. Turn 1, as usual, is quick and more about positioning than combat. No battles had taken place, but many houses were preparing for future conflict. Lannisters, Baratheons, Starks, and Martells all star consolidated in order to bulk up their armies. They opted out of short-term game by not taking easy castles and were looking to the future. If they were going to win, they needed more men, and they needed them now. And when turn 2 came around and a mustering card flipped up, the armies only grew. And by the time the players were placing orders down, the board had already filled up with soldiers. Conflict was only a matter of time. The first bloodshed occurred up north in the Bay of Ice, as the Greyjoy Navy headed north to set the stage for an early northern invasion. The other houses this turn took time taking land rather than fighting each other. The Lannisters claimed Riverrun and Harrenhal, the Baratheons took Cracklaw Point, the Martells Storm's End, and the Tyrells took a bet on supply by placing a footman in the Blackwater. The game was moving fast, and it was already turn 3, and the Westeros cards would be brutal. 2 Days of Summer cards were pulled, which means nothing happens, and then a web of lies to take the supports off the board. We may still be in early game, but now is the time to strike for some of our great houses. Sir Groundhog saw this opportunity and sent his Baratheon fleet up north to crush the Lords of Winter. If anyone is in panic mode right now, it's Naman OJ and the Starks of Winterfell, who are now on a 2-front war. The Starks tried to come up with some strategy to get things going his way by attacking the Greyjoys in a losing battle. He was able to waste Greyjoy's 4 card, a small victory in the sign of defeat for the Starks. You Got Franked and his Martell Navy also took the chance to claim the West Summer Sea from the Tyrells, crippling the Tyrells' ability to move freely around the board. And the final battle of the turn took place in the Blackwater as the Lord Max Brody led Lannisters destroyed the lone footmen sitting on the land, fully securing the center of the board for the Lannisters. A clash of kings and a bidding would come in turn 4, where the big winner was Chogo and his Ironborn. He would claim the Iron Throne, maintain the fiefdoms, and also get 2 stars. With Greyjoy cards and these placements on the influence tracks, the Greyjoys looked to be the dominant house for the time being. The first battle would come between the Jax Mohansen-led Tyrells and the Martells, as the Martells would attack the island of the Arbor in a losing effort to play their Doran Martell card, which allows the Martells to drop you to the bottom of any influence track. Now, if we rewind to the bidding, the Tyrells had just spent nearly all their money on getting the top of the King's Court track, and it would be heartbreaking to lose it this soon. But the Martells opted for something else. The Martells instead dropped the Tyrells to the bottom of the fiefdoms track, which would cause the Martells to win any tiebreaker in battle now against the Tyrells, which inadvertently makes the ability for the Tyrells to retake the West Summer Sea impossible. A big brain move from Frank, who didn't stop there but sent his troops to clear out any Tyrell invaders in his land. However, that wasn't the biggest move in turn 4. The biggest move was the invasion of Winterfell. The Greyjoy sent a siege engine to the ancient castle and claimed it for the world to see. Naman OJ and his Starks were truly in hell now. Turn 5 would also set the stage for endgame. The Greyjoys broke off their alliance with the Lannisters by killing one of their knights and sending troops to the border. The Lannisters also prepped their troops by consolidating a large host in the Sea Road marshes. The Baratheons sneakily took Moat Cailin and the Eyrie, which is something you don't see every day for Baratheon players, and the Martells humiliated the Tyrells by repelling their attack in the sea and taking control of the Sacred Arbor. When I said turn 5 was setting the stage for endgame, I meant it literally. In just 6 turns, the finals of Frame of Thrones 3 would be decided and a champion crowned. The standings at the beginning of this turn are as follows. The Baratheons are in first with 5 castles, a 3-way tie for second between Martell, Lannister, and Greyjoy, all with 4 castles, and then Tyrell and Stark, trying to come up with something, are sitting at 2 and 1 castles respectively. But a surprisingly simple mistake by the Martells would cost him and everyone else the title of Frame of Thrones World Champion. But in the end, it wasn't a large, glorious battle that ended everything. It was quick and sudden movement that netted Sir Groundhog his 7th castle, as House Baratheon saw the opportunity and split his forces. sending a knight to Storm's End, putting Groundhog at 6 castles, and his siege engine up north to White Harbor, where with the support of his navy, was able to take White Harbor to mark his 7th castle and give him the win and his 2nd title of Frame of Thrones World Champion. He is the unquestioned GOAT of Game of Thrones, the board game. Over the course of weeks, 24 players from around the world came together to play Game of Thrones, the board game. They spent hours of their own time competing against one another, not only for the title of Frame of Thrones World Champion, but for themselves, and to show off their skill and craft they have honed in their many years of experience in Game of Thrones, the board game. I realized this time commitment and the dedication all these players showed, the grit, the talent, and the overall passion for this game we all hold so close to our heart. And in the end, all I can say is thank you to the players for making this happen. And thank you for watching.